Historians of Reddit, what is the biggest frick you moment in history? Ferruccio Lamborghini was a rich man owning his company that built tractors. He talked to Ferrari about the imperfections of his car and how to improve them, and they basically laughed at a young tractor mechanic trying to tell them about sport cars. So he decided to start making luxury sport cars to compete with Ferrari, and thus, the rivalry was born. So I'd say the middle finger of this guy to Ferrari was pretty noticeable. Every time I read this story I wish Lamborghini had its own F1 team to beat Ferrari, since that was Enzo's true pride and joy. The construction and use of the Werwolf, supposedly the largest trebuchet ever built. When it was disassembled it would fill up 30 wagons. So anyways, King Edward I built this to siege a Scottish castle, but before it was even built the Scottish people tried to surrender. To which Edward responded with a prompt no. In actuality he responded with "You do not deserve any grace, but must surrender to my will." In other words, I built this trebuchet over 40 days and I am most definitely going to use it, and proceeded to use the trebuchet anyways. In the late 1980s Nintendo and Sony developed a CD add-on for the Super Nintendo. Nintendo then pulled out of the partnership and opted to work with Philips instead and released the CDI. This move was highly frowned upon because Nintendo had decided to ditch a fellow Japanese company over a foreign one. So Sony picked up the pieces of the project and tried to partner with Sega. The board of directors turned the idea down, saying that's a stupid idea. Sony doesn't know how to make hardware. They don't know how to make software either. Why would we want to do this? At the end Sony released a game system by the name of PlayStation in 1994 to compete with the Nintendo 64 and outsold their former partners nearly 3-1. Plus it marked the first time that Nintendo wasn't top dog since they released the NES. A pirate known as Jean Lafitte had a bounty of $500 put on him by governor, so he put a $5,000 bounty on the governor. No you. When Otto von Bismarck was about 50, he was walking down a street when a man ran up to him and shot him 5 times. Otto then turned around and began to beat the absolute crap out of him until some armed guards come to help him. When they inspected Otto for wounds, they found that all 5 hit, but they all either just grazed him or bounced off his ribs. Literally the Iron Chancellor. German quality. Napoleon invited his brother-in-law to speak with him before his coronation as emperor to remind the brother-in-law that he objected to Napoleon marrying Josephine because Napoleon would amount to nothing. Now this is the kind of petty frick I can get behind. In AD 37 the new Roman Emperor Gaius, better known by the nickname Caligula, built a bridge across the sea. It stretched 3 miles across the deep blue waters of the Bay of Naples at ancient Rome's most fashionable seaside resort of Baiae. But Caligula's was no ordinary bridge. It was a temporary, floating structure built on wooden pontoons, a costly and impressive featuring of engineering. It served a single purpose before being dismantled. On a day of boiling heat watched by crowds of spectators, Caligula rode across the bridge. His armor glinted in the sunlight, for the 24-year-old emperor had dressed himself in the golden breastplate of the legendary Greek hero Alexander the Great. On the following day Caligula made the journey in reverse, this time riding in a chariot, followed by soldiers of his personal guard. It was a pointless piece of showmanship, lost on the majority of the crowd, several of whom fell drunkenly to their deaths in the sea after 2 days partying. One historian claimed Caligula pulled the stunt to disprove a prophecy that he had no more chance of becoming emperor than of riding a horse across the Bay of Baiae. Threatening to make his horse a consul was also in the same vein. It wasn't a serious consideration born out of madness but rather an insult to the Senate. Either my horse can do a better job than any of you, or I can make my horse consul and you can't do anything about it. So when France exiles Napoleon Bonaparte, the first time, they didn't think to change out military personnel, so he basically rolls up to the first French outpost he gets to, says sup and begins reassembling an army. By the time he gets to Paris, he's got enough forces that France is like, well, welcome back. Morocco was the first country to recognize the independence of the United States, which was very nice of them. But the reason they did it was that they had a treaty with England which prevented them from tolerating or engaging in piracy against English ships. No such prohibition on American shipping. In the 1970s the small town of Vulcan, West Virginia asked for state funding to replace a bridge into town. The state legislature refused to grant Vulcan the funding they needed. Instead, the town appealed to the Soviet Union for aid. After hearing about the request, the state legislature immediately granted over $1 million for the town to build a new bridge. If a small town in WV asking for Soviet funding in the middle of the Cold War isn't a big middle finger to the state government, then I don't know what is. The funny part is that 2 Soviet representatives at the US Embassy actually came over to look at the broken bridge and seriously considered funding the rebuilding to pee off the Americans. This requires some background. The Spartans were famously blunt. They were trained to get to the point when speaking, instead of using artsy and beautiful language that would have been common at the time, by being bitten on the thumb if they became long-winded. Now to the meat. Philip II of Macedon, Alexander the Great's father, sent the Spartans a letter saying, "Would you like me to enter your land as friend or foe?" The Spartans responded with one word: neither. Philip was irate. He then sent another long-winded message: "If once I enter into your territories, I will destroy ye all, never to rise again." The Spartans then sent back one word: "If." It was like putting your head in a lion's mouth, and I love it. That's where the meaning of laconic comes from. The Australians stealing a tank from no man's land in World War I because they could. After the Restoration, the English dug up the body of Oliver Cromwell and hung, drawn and quartered the body, sticking the head on London Bridge. The Stuarts had form with this. Mary, Queen of Scots, had dead traitors embalmed so that their dead bodies could stand trial and then be drawn and quartered in public. On the crowning of King Henry VII, he backdated his own reign before the date of the Battle of Bosworth, meaning anyone who was loyal to him now but had shown any sign of opposition at Bosworth was now a traitor and an enemy to the realm. Justice served. Frick, that sounds like the premise behind the Blackadder. The first cell phone. The first call ever made from a cell phone was to a competitor's landline. Big dong energy. This is more petty, but when Taft bragged to his friends via telegram about scaling a mountain on horseback, that it was a few thousand feet, clear weather, all in all not too difficult, his friend replied, "How is horse?" Taft was a chunky boy. When Germanic tribes invaded Britain after the Romans left, they named the native Celts Welsc, meaning foreigner, even though they themselves were the foreigners. That later became the word Welsh, which the English promptly adopted for phrases like Welch on a bet. Yeah, but the Welsh language is itself a middle finger to English speakers. Stop sending people to kill me. We've already captured 5 of them, one of them with a bomb and another with a rifle. If you don't stop sending killers, I'll send a very fast working one to Moscow, and I certainly won't have to send another. Tito to Joseph Stalin. If someone made a black comedy TV series about the Eastern Bloc, this would be one of the highlights. Not the biggest, probably, but the first that came to mind. Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe's response to the Nazi demand that Bastogne surrender. Nuts. Nuts. The general's word echo clear. Nuts. The Nazis shall hear. I'm not an historian, but I know this World War I fact. In 1918, during the Battle of Villers-Britonneux, Major James Robertson made a plan to steal a German tank stuck in no man's land. There was no point in getting it, because it was dangerous going out there and the tank wasn't a threat to anyone. Not giving frick about that, he grouped with 12 other men to retrieve that tank, under machine gun fire and inside mustard gas, just to say to the German army, frick you, look what we got here. Thanks to him and the other men, today that tank is the only original World War I tank we have, and it's called Mephisto. It's not the only original World War I tank, it's the only original German World War I tank. The Second Defenestration of Prague. The Holy Roman Emperor and King of Bohemia sends representatives to the Protestant city of Prague telling them to convert to Catholicism. The representatives get thrown out a window and allegedly landed in a pile of manure. I hate manure. On 30th September 1938, a treaty called Munich Agreement was signed, causing Germany's annexation of Sudetenland, a region of western Czechoslovakia, where many German people lived. It was signed by leaders of UK, France, Italy and Germany. UK and France signed it because Hitler promised. that he won't go to war if he got the Sudetenland. We all know how that turned out, but that's not all. The biggest frick you to Czechoslovakia was that they weren't invited to the meeting. Yes, they weren't invited to the meeting about their own region. Also, France was an ally of Czechoslovakia at the time. So yeah, thanks for support, France. Julius Caesar's death. At least he died surrounded by friends. The first recorded incident of a group project where most of the group doesn't do the fricking work. Not the biggest, but definitely one to note. In 1966, Charles de Gaulle ordered all US troops out of France, as he said the country was leaving NATO. LBJ's first words were to his Secretary of State, Dean Rusk. Ask him about the cemeteries, Dean. When Dean Rusk mentioned whether or not the 60,000 plus US soldiers buried in France were to be removed, de Gaulle simply stood up and left the room, embarrassed. It really should be noted for context, this is after decades of animosity starting in World War II, with US generals seeing de Gaulle as potentially the next dictator they'd have to fight. Highlights include threatening to join the Russians' fear if Vietnam were granted independence. Oh boy, that ended well. French surrender in World War II. Hitler dictates that the French capitulation take place at Compiègne, a forest north of Paris. This is the same spot where 22 years earlier the Germans had signed the armistice ending World War I. Hitler intends to disgrace the French and avenge the German defeat. To further deepen the humiliation, he orders that the signing ceremony take place in the same railroad car that hosted the earlier surrender. The armistice is signed on the 22nd of June. Under its terms, 2/3 of France is to be occupied by the Germans. The French army is to be disbanded. In addition, France must bear the cost of the German invasion. I was hoping someone would post this. Hitler later destroyed the railroad carriage when things started going south for the Axis. The Battle of Alesia. Julius Caesar's attacking some Gauls in modern-day France, and they go hide in a castle on top of a hill. Caesar's army isn't big enough to take them all at once, and the Gauls have reinforcements coming, so a siege is impossible. So Caesar just builds a bigger castle around the one he's attacking. He literally just built 2 walls back to back and a ring around the castle. The first Gaul army was already too small to defeat Caesar, and his fortifications only gave him a greater advantage. The reinforcements were also unable to defeat Caesar's army now that he was behind several layers of spike pits and both earthen and wooden walls. Plus the Gauls inside had no way to communicate with the reinforcements outside, so they couldn't coordinate attacks. Both Gallic armies were defeated as they attacked Caesar's newly built fortifications, and Caesar emerged victorious. It's probably my favorite battle of all time. Andrew Jackson was walking around Washington, D.C. when an assassin tried to kill him with 2 pistols. Both pistols misfired, and Jackson proceeded to beat the would-be killer within an inch of his life with his cane. Henry VIII divorcing Catherine of Aragon. Henry VIII, I want a divorce. Church, we don't do that here. Henry VIII, I'll start my own church, with blackjack and H. Danes attacking raiding Athelad after he just paid them not to. Genghis Khan to Shah al-Din. After the Khwarezmids plundered one of Genghis Khan's caravans, killed his people, and took his crap, he thought to take the diplomatic approach and send 2 envoys and an interpreter. Shah al-Din decided to be a dumbass about it. He shaved the heads of the envoys to shame them and sent them back with the head of the interpreter. Mr. Khan was kinda pee, so he marched 200,000 of his boys and fricking annihilated their town with only 1/4 of that number are even able to fight back. He was so pee at the Shah that he had the rivers keeping the surrounding villages alive fully diverted, so that he would literally wipe al-Din's birthplace off the map and make it so that it was like he never existed. No one would settle there or live there ever again. No one would be there to remember his enemy who had disrespected him. Not even the dogs or cats would be spared, said Genghis Khan. You can still go see the ruins of the once great cities of the Khwarezmid Empire. They are huge and the wind blasts sand through the bleached bones of a civilization that Genghis Khan reduced to a wasteland for having disrespected him one time. When Alexander the Great cast the Gordian knot, instead of untying it. when Alcibiades fricked the Spartan king's wife, then fled to Persia, became a high command and made it back to Athens where he once started as a politicane and became one again. He said frick you to Athens. He betrayed them, Sparta and Persia, and got away with it because he looked so dang good. You've been visited by the luckiest pig in the world. Comment lucky piggy below to get some of his luck. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video, or don't. Either way, have a great day you magnificent people.